Hi, everyone. We just want to say thank you for joining the network again for this most important webinar. This webinar is being presented dealing with the state of tip workers and the New Jersey fight for $15 an hour minimum wage. Today, our presenters, we're very fortunate to have Saru Jayaraman, President of the Restaurant Opportunity Center. She is an impactful leader in this campaign, and her organization, known as ROC, was founded after 9/11 in response to the large number of displaced restaurant workers. We just wanted to cover a couple housekeeping issues. As usual, our audience will be muted, but you can type in any questions that you may have that you'd like to present to our speakers today, and we will be glad to share that with them. In addition, this training webinar will be archived. You will be able to access it at your convenience 24 hours a day through our HCD and NJ website. So if there's no further ado, I would like to introduce Saru Jayaraman, President again of the Restaurant Opportunity Center, and she will discuss with us the impact of the $15 an hour proposed minimum wage and how this legislation will impact New Jersey workers and businesses, and provide a specific note on tip workers who may and often do earn even less than the minimum wage. Thank you, and Saru, I will turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining, and thank you for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about tipped workers and the fight for 15. Again, first, who I am. My name is Saru. I am the president of the Restaurant Opportunity Centers United and co-founder of ROC, our organization. But I'm also a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. I teach at the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley and run a research center at UC Berkeley called the Food Labor Research Center. And our organization, ROC, we've been fighting for what we call one fair wage for the last several years, which I'll explain in a minute. But we've been around as an organization for 17 years, since 9/11, when I co-founded ROC together with workers from Windows on the World, which was the restaurant at the top of the World Trade Center. On that morning, about 73 workers died and about 250 workers lost their jobs. And I was asked to start a relief center in the aftermath of the tragedy. What started as a relief center has grown into a national organization with 130,000 restaurant workers, restaurant employers. We've got at least 770 restaurant owners, restaurant companies that are working with us on this fight for what we call one fair wage, and several thousand consumer members. So restaurant owners, workers, and consumers all working together over the last 17 years to improve wages and working conditions in this industry, and over the last 5 or 6 years in particular around what we call one fair wage, which I'll explain in a minute. Before I get into one fair wage, I do want to especially call out and thank the Working Families Party of New Jersey and Analilia Mejia, who's been such an incredible leader leading the fight for 15. I think she'll be joining, either she has joined us or she will be joining us soon, but definitely would not be, we would not be invested in New Jersey on the fight for 15 and making sure nobody's left behind in New Jersey if it weren't for Analilia and the Working Families Party in New Jersey's commitment, which is unique among states, to making sure that the $15 bill is not just for some, but really is for all. So we really, really appreciate that partnership and solidarity, and it's why we're here today. You can advance to the next slide. If you could advance to the first slide, that'd be great. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay, sorry. If you could, thank you so much. So, as you know, we represent restaurant workers and employers nationwide, and the thing that most people don't know is the size and scale of our industry. We actually have just surpassed the 14 million worker mark in the restaurant industry. We are the nation's second largest private sector employer overall, and the number one top fastest growing private sector employer in the United States. There's no industry growing faster than the restaurant industry. But unfortunately, despite the industry's size and its growth, it continues to be the absolute bottom of the barrel, lowest paying employer in the United States. So every year the U.S. Department of Labor under Obama put out a list of the 10 lowest paying jobs in America. And every year, the 7 lowest of the 10 in America are always restaurant jobs. We are the absolute lowest paying employer. And I think it's really important to understand the impact on the economy, that if you are the largest and fastest growing sector, but you also are the absolute lowest paying, it means that as an industry, we are very responsible for growing the low wage floor of the economy, very responsible for the growing income inequality in America, very responsible for the fact that right now we're a little over 1 in 3 working Americans working full-time and living in poverty. And we are getting closer and closer over the next couple of years to 1 in 2 working Americans working full-time and living in poverty. And that is because of the growth of this immense sector. A large part of that is due to the growth of this immense sector, which is so low paying. And, you know, we have done so much research as to how and why it is that you've got such a huge sector, one of the largest sectors, in fact, the fastest growing private sector employer in New Jersey. How is it that that industry is also the absolute lowest paying? And all of our research, and we've done over 60 reports, and I've written 3 books on the industry. We have multiple PhDs on our staff, and you know, I'm a professor. We work with a ton of academics, and all of our research shows that it is not in any way organic or necessary to the industry to have to be so low paying. That in fact, the fact that we are the largest and fastest growing industry with the lowest paying jobs is entirely political, and it is due to the money, power, and influence of a trade lobby called the National Restaurant Association. We call it the other NRA, and it really is led by the Fortune 500 chains, the IHOPs, the Applebee's, the Olive Gardens, and it has been around in various forms since emancipation of slavery. This is the part that we just uncovered a few years ago in my last book, Fork. In doing research as to this trade lobby, which I myself thought couldn't have been around for more than 30 or 40 years, we discovered that it has been around in various forms since emancipation. And that tipping as a practice did not originate in the United States. It originated in feudal Europe. It was something that aristocrats and nobles gave to serfs and vassals, but always on top of a wage, never instead of a wage. It was always on top of a wage. It was really when the idea of tipping came to the United States in the 1850s and 1860s. It was rich Americans traveling to Europe, coming back and trying to show off that they knew the rules of Europe and trying to tip. And it was actually very rejected by much of the American populace as a vestige of feudalism. But the restaurant industry demanded the right to hire newly freed slaves, not pay them anything at all, and let them live on this newfangled idea that had just come from Europe called a tip. Now, that was a mutation of the original concept of tipping. The original concept of tipping from feudal Europe was always that it was an extra or a bonus on top of a wage. But when it came to the States, because of the restaurant lobby, and because of slavery, this trade lobby demanded the right to hire newly freed slaves, not pay them anything at all, and have them live entirely on tips. This being a mostly Black female workforce. And that whole notion of a mostly Black female workforce getting no wage at all from their employer and having to live on tips was made law in 1938 as part of the New Deal, when everybody got the right to a minimum wage for the first time, except for tipped workers, who were left behind at a $0 wage as long as tips brought them to the full minimum wage. And of course, you got a mostly Black female workforce given a $0 wage because of this legacy of slavery. And we went from $0 in 1938 to $2.13 an hour at the federal level in 2018. So a $2 increase over 80 years federally. And even more appalling to me, we are still at $0 an hour in New Jersey. The state minimum wage for tipped workers is still non-existent in New Jersey. So any workers that are not covered by federal law, and there are some, can still have no wage at all and live on tips. And so you've got this very horrific system of paying workers nothing or next to nothing, $0 an hour or $2 an hour if they're covered by federal law, $2.13. And the Restaurant Association over the last 80 years has said it's okay because these are white guys working in fancy fine dining steakhouses. They're making, they like to say, $100,000 a year in tips. They earn at least $30 or $40 an hour in these enormous amounts of tips that they receive. When in fact, the actual data and reality shows 70% of tipped workers in New Jersey and in America are actually women. And they're largely women who work at IHOPs and Applebee's and Olive Garden. Their median wage, including tips, hovers at about $8, $8.50 an hour. They suffer from the 3 times the poverty rate of the rest of the U.S. workforce. They use food stamps at double the rate of the rest of the U.S. workforce. And they have the highest rates of sexual harassment, literally and statistically, of any industry, because when you are a woman working in New Jersey at an IHOP and earning $2.13 from your employer, that wage is so low it goes entirely to taxes. You're living completely off your tips, and you must tolerate whatever the customer does to you, however they touch you or treat you or talk to you, because the customer is always right. The customer pays your bills, not your employer. And our research shows that actually workers report managers encourage them dress more sexy, show more cleavage, wear tighter clothing in order to make more money in tips, which means the workers in our industry are not told to tolerate harassment. They're actually told to go out and encourage harassment. And the more harassment they can encourage, the more tips they will earn, the better off they will be. And when this is your first job, I failed to mention, with the size of the industry, 14 million workers nationally, 1 in 11 American workers, 1 in 11 workers in New Jersey currently works in restaurants. 1 in 2 Americans and 1 in 2 people in New Jersey, 1 in 2 adults in New Jersey has worked in this industry at some point in their lifetime. It is largely the first job for for half of American adults. And for these young people, the first job, this is how they're introduced to the world of work. This is how they learn what is acceptable, tolerable, legal, ethical in the workplace. This is how they're inculcated into how they should be tolerating, or in this case, encouraging harassment. And it's a world in which they're told by managers, go out and get harassed. And the more you can get, the better off you are. And this has incredible lifelong impacts on women. We have been surveying older women who worked in the industry in their youth who say, I have been harassed later in life in my current profession, whatever it is. And I didn't do anything about it because it was never as bad as it was when I was a young woman working in restaurants, which means our industry doesn't just have the highest rates of harassment. It sets the standard for what is acceptable and tolerable in the workplace, because we have allowed this one industry to get away with saying we shouldn't pay our own workers' wages. You, the customers, should pay our workers' wages for us. And thus putting the largest workforce of women in New Jersey in the minimum wage category, the largest workforce of low-wage women, in a terribly vulnerable situation vis-a-vis sexual harassment. So fortunately, there's a very clear pathway with tremendous success of how not to do this. 7 states have what we call one fair wage. That means requiring restaurants and all employers to pay the full minimum wage, and tips are on top of that, as they were always intended to be, as they were in feudal Europe, in fact. Full minimum wage with tips on top. These 7 states are California, Oregon, Nevada, Montana, Washington, Minnesota, and Alaska. So not all blue states, some purpley, even red states. These states require restaurants to pay the full minimum wage with tips on top. If you listen to the Restaurant Association, you would think these 7 states have no restaurants, that all restaurants have somehow died and collapsed and gone out of business. In fact, these 7 states have higher restaurant industry sales per capita, higher job growth in the restaurant industry and among tipped workers, higher rates of tipping. Many of these states have the same rates of tipping as the rest of the country. Some of these states like California and Alaska have higher rates of tipping. In fact, Alaska has the highest tipping average of any state in the United States. And most importantly, they have 1/2 the rate of sexual harassment in the restaurant industry as New Jersey and the 43 states with a sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. Why? Because when you are a woman who works in a restaurant where I live in California or in Montana or in Washington State, you get an actual paycheck from your employer. You get a full minimum wage. The tips are an extra as they were always intended to be. And you do not have to tolerate as much from customers to feed your kids. Let's keep in mind, 40% of tipped workers in New Jersey are single mothers, feeding their families on tips, having to tolerate inappropriate customer behavior, people grabbing their butts or saying inappropriate things or touching their body in order to get tips to feed their kids because they do not get a wage from their employer. Whereas in California and Alaska and Montana, they get an actual wage, an actual paycheck from their boss. They still get money in tips, but they are not as entirely dependent on customers, and they can reject harassment, and the power dynamic shifts between the customers and the women. So we have 1/2 the rate of sexual harassment in the industry. A very clear solution: pay these women an actual wage. The industry is fine, it booms, the workers do better, and we can cut harassment in the industry that is the first job for 1/2 of women in New Jersey. Now, if that were not enough of a reason to go ahead and pass a $15 bill that actually eliminates this lower wage for tipped workers, phases out this lower wage for tipped workers, last week, President Trump made it even more urgent for New Jersey to do the right thing on this issue. Because last week, Trump's Department of Labor announced that it is rescinding all rules, all regulation, and all enforcement with regard to the two-tiered wage system. Before last week, workers had some rights where they could say, I'm being made to do work that doesn't garner tips. I'm being made to, roll napkins or stock shelves or clean a bathroom. I'm not interacting with customers. I need to be paid the full minimum wage, not $2.13 an hour. Those rules, regulations, and enforcement are gone at the federal level. What does that mean? That means that employers are now free to pay anybody the sub-minimum wage in a restaurant, regardless of whether they are interacting with customers or not, regardless of whether they're earning tips or not. And immediately with this change, we have seen a number of employers begin to actually just get rid of non-tipped workers and pay everybody the sub-minimum wage. Meaning what? If New Jersey passes a $15 bill with a sub-minimum wage, let's say it's $5 an hour as was recently proposed in the Assembly. What New Jersey is actually doing is passing a $5 minimum wage, not a $15 minimum wage. Because without regulation and enforcement, without rules from the federal government as to who can be paid the sub-minimum wage and under what conditions somebody can be paid the sub-minimum wage, effectively the sub-minimum wage is the minimum wage to employers who now have no incentive to pay an actual $15 wage, but rather will be allowed to pay everybody $5 an hour. Trump's announcement makes the sub-minimum wage, whatever it is, the minimum wage in the state of New Jersey. So we clearly have a very clear solution. Require everybody to be paid the minimum wage. Do not create two tiers. And you can ensure that everybody actually gets paid the minimum wage. Tips are on top of it as they were always intended to be. Can we move to the next slide? So with this data and evidence on the history of the legacy of slavery, the sub-minimum wages, actual origins, the nature of sexual harassment, and the positive benefits of moving to one fair wage, We were able to pass one fair wage on the ballot in Maine, in Washington, D.C., and in Flagstaff, Arizona. But the Restaurant Association, as a corporate trade lobby, has enormous influence, not over the public, which always universally votes in favor of one fair wage. If you ask the public, should tipped workers get the full minimum wage, the public will respond by saying, I thought they already were making the full minimum wage. So the polling we've done shows universal support for this in every state. But the Restaurant Association, the restaurant lobby, has enormous influence through lots of money over state legislatures, and got the state legislature in Maine to overturn the most popular ballot measure in the history of the state. Literally, our ballot measure was the most popular ballot measure in the history of the state. They're trying to repeal it in Washington, D.C., but we are actually poised to stop that. So we've won this on the ballot in a number of places. In April, we got an incredible victory. We passed a bipartisan bill in this insane Congress, making tips the property of workers now and forever. Trump tried to make tips the property of owners, but we passed a law making it the property of workers. In that bill, we also made it easier for employers to move to one fair wage by adding a component of that bill that says if employers pay one fair wage to all workers, meaning the full minimum wage and letting tips be on top of that, that workers could then volunteer to share tips with the back of the house, which is illegal right now in New Jersey and most of the country. But where an employer pays the full minimum wage, workers can share, as they currently share with bussers and runners. Servers can also share with kitchen staff, which is something that employers have actually wanted for a really long time, to increase equity between front and back and to create more of a team between front and back. So we were able to actually pave the way for employers to move in this direction towards one fair wage through a bill that we got passed in this Congress in April 2018. We collected 400,000 signatures to put this on the ballot in Michigan, November 2018. The Republicans who control the legislature were so terrified that we would get on the ballot and drive millions of working people, Democratic-leaning working people, to the polls, that they actually passed one fair wage as law in Michigan. They have now tried to amend it, but that is actually unconstitutional. So we're fairly confident that one fair wage will remain the law of the land in the state of Michigan. And in that process, we actually mobilized 20,000 youth voters, restaurant worker voters around the issue, resulting in a doubling of the youth vote and the highest midterm turnout in 50 years in Michigan. It was extraordinary. I'm saying this to say for legislators to know and for other people to know, this issue not only polls really well, it is something that actually wakes up a sleeping giant of unlikely voters, single moms, young people who work in this industry and are sick of being paid $2 an hour. Governor Cuomo announced a year ago that he would move New York to become the 8th state to eliminate the sub-minimum wage. He held a series of hearings around the state on the issue. He has the power to do it through executive action, and we believe that he will any day now. And in 2019, given all of this momentum, 12 states and the federal government are actually moving one fair wage. And so the U.S. House of Representatives, which, as you all know, flipped Democratic, is introducing one fair wage in the first 100 days and is likely to pass it. And I just will say one more thing on this slide towards all the momentum. A lot of this momentum over the last year is as a result of Me Too and Time's Up, which last fall when Me Too and Time's Up erupted, we got over 400 media hits on the connection between the sub-minimum wage and sexual harassment, including a major spread in the New York Times and the New York Times editorial board coming out in support of one fair wage. And those 400 media hits, including me attending the Golden Globes with Amy Poehler as part of the Time's Up action in January, which resulted in the issue being covered on 60 Minutes and 2020 and Del Mar, and pushing Governor Cuomo to actually act in New York. And so we've gotten not only tremendous press, but we now have about 25 or 30 celebrities who are working with us on the issue, championing the issue. Many of them worked as restaurant workers in their youth. We brought Jane Fonda, as many of you know, a few weeks ago or last month to New Jersey, and she's just one of many actresses who weighed in on the issue because of their close personal connection to the issue and because it's been so clearly proven to be the source of the largest, the industry that has the highest rates of sexual harassment of any industry. Okay, we can move on. So I mentioned that we have 770 restaurant owners. These are restaurant companies, some chains that are in New Jersey, some smaller restaurants that are mom and pop restaurants, one in Newark actually, some high profile, very high profile celebrity chefs like Tom Colicchio, star of Top Chef, and others. So we have a wide range of restaurant companies that actually agree with us, have come to Congress to say we don't want fair wage, have come to state legislatures to say we want one fair wage. Even the Golden Gate Restaurant Association, which is the San Francisco version of the National Restaurant Association, has come with us to the New York State Legislature to say it works in California, you can do it in New York and everywhere else. So we have fabulous restaurant owners that are willing to stand with us and say the future of the industry is one in which we treat these workers as the professionals that they are, and we pay them a full wage like every other industry, and tips are on top, as they were always intended to be. We also have, as I mentioned, the New York Times and USA Today's editorial boards that have come out in support of one fair wage. All of the major national women's and civil rights organizations have endorsed one fair wage, and all of the national federal Democratic leadership in the House, in the Senate, President Obama, Hillary Clinton, the DNC have all put out very public statements in support of not just raising the overall minimum wage, but fully phasing out and eliminating the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. Move on. So what we are proposing right now, why we're doing this call, is that $15 is moving in New Jersey thanks to the work of everybody likely on this call and the leadership of the Working Families Party. The key question is who will be left out of that $15 bill, and will there be a sub-minimum wage, which, as I said, because of the Trump Act last week, really that sub-minimum wage will be the minimum wage in New Jersey. And so the real question is, will the sub-minimum wage exist, or can we really phase out this wage in New Jersey, as many other states are doing, as the House is moving to do, as many other states are doing? And the real reason that, you know, the real obstacle to that is the National Restaurant Association and their incredible amount of funding and lobbying influence in the state capitol. The key arguments they use with legislatures and the public are these four that I've listed here. There are a few others, but I want to go through these four in particular because I'm sure you've heard them, and talk about them a little bit. The first thing they say is that this will kill the industry. Restaurants will go out of business. They will lay off people. They will cut workers' hours. I could give you reams of data and studies to show this is not true. But perhaps one of the best things you could do is just come here to California, where you will see that our industry is growing faster than it is in New York or New Jersey. The industry is booming, and everybody here gets a full minimum wage, which is going up to 15. We're close to 13 now. We're going up to 15. Industry is booming in every segment: casual, fine dining, and fast food, small, large, chain, independent. Every segment is booming. But you don't even have to come as far as California. You can look at the state of New York, which has gone, because of our advocacy, from a $3 wage for tipped workers to almost $10 over the last 6 or 7 years. And our work is now to push Governor Cuomo to have tipped workers go all the way to 15 like everybody else. But over those last 6 or 7 years, if any of you have been to New York over the last 6 or 7 years, which I'm sure all of you have, you will notice that the industry is booming in New York, having tripled the wage for tipped workers over the last 6 or 7 years. We've gone from 3 to almost 10, while the industry has continued to grow. We've seen small business in New York boom. We've seen tipping rates remain exactly constant, and actually tipping percentages remain constant, but tipping amounts go up because, of course, as a percentage of the overall bill, the amount of money workers are taking home has gone up. So the idea that restaurants will go out of business, you can just cross the border and look at New York to know that that's just not the case. In terms of, what's particularly troubling is the way in which since November 2016, since Trump's election, the National Restaurant Association literally hired the Trump-Pence communications firm, Mercury PR, to basically do the same thing that Mercury PR and the Trump campaign had done on the electorate, which is try to divide working people and especially try to get some working people afraid in a space of fear that would push them to advocate against their own interests. So they have tried to spread, the Restaurant Association since November 2016 has tried to spread as much fear and misinformation among workers that they will lose their tips if their wages go up. Again, the 7 states have the same or higher tipping averages than New Jersey. In fact, San Francisco and Alaska have the highest tipping averages of any regions in the United States. And New York has had the same tipping average over the last 6 or 7 years as the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers has tripled. So the idea that tips will go down as wages go up is ludicrous for anybody who's worked in the industry and knows that customers do not ask you how much you make or tip on the basis of how much you earn. Tipping, as we know from years of research, is not correlated with any of that. So the idea that workers will lose tips has been not only factually borne out to not be true, but just doesn't make sense in terms of the research as to how people tip. Third argument that the Restaurant Association makes: nobody actually earns $2 an hour. Employers are supposed to make sure that tips make up the difference between the sub-minimum wage and the regular minimum wage. Everybody makes a ton of money in tips, and tips always way exceed the minimum wage. There's no reason to pay these people a full minimum wage. Now, even before Trump made his announcement last week, under Obama, the Obama Department of Labor conducted an investigation of this very issue. Do employers follow the rules with regard to making sure that tips make up the difference with regard to the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers? They found an 84% violation rate with regard to restaurants actually following the rule, actually making sure that tips make up the difference between the sub-minimum wage and the regular minimum wage. That was before last week's announcement that all regulation and enforcement with regard to the 2-tiered wage system is out the door. And over the last month, we've seen a number of employers actually decide, as a result of this new announcement, to just move their workers from the full minimum wage back down to the sub-minimum wage because there is no enforcement of these laws. Now, then somebody might say, the Restaurant Association might say, okay, well, then it's just an issue of enforcement. New Jersey should just ramp up enforcement to make sure tips make up the difference between the sub-minimum wage and the regular minimum wage. And we say, even if there was a 100% compliance with employers making sure that tips make up the difference, right now there's 16% compliance, and that's declining with last week's announcement. But even if there was 100% compliance, you'd still have a majority female workforce being forced to go out and encourage harassment in order to earn more money in tips. As single mothers go out and encourage harassment from customers in order to make that money in tips. And so it's not about enforcement, it's about ensuring all workers get a full minimum wage with tips on top, as they were always intended to be. The last argument the Restaurant Association likes to make is, we shouldn't be thinking about paying more money to these servers in what they call the front of the house on the dining floor. It's the people of color in the back of the house who are really struggling. That's what we should be focused on. First of all, in the majority of restaurants, that divide doesn't exist. The majority of restaurants are not fine dining. They are casual restaurants like IHOP and Applebee's, where workers of color work in every position, and they are actually really struggling with very little money in tips. But even in a fine dining restaurant, that racial inequity between front and back is not God ordained. That is due to the racial discrimination of restaurant owners. There's no reason why workers of color cannot be servers and bartenders in fine dining restaurants. And more importantly, if you really want to create equity, do what California and the 7 states have already done, which is that they pay everybody a full minimum wage, and tips are shared with the kitchen staff. It creates a greater sense of team, reduces the power differential and inequity between front and back, and it has so many other benefits that I can get into later on. So the best solution for equity between front and back, between white workers and workers of color in our industry is to actually pay a full minimum wage and have tips shared across the board. I do want to say that one of the key things the Restaurant Association has done to drive these misinformation is actually, with the help of Mercury PR, the Trump-Pence communications firm, fund and create a fake AstroTurf worker organization that was actually featured on last week tonight on HBO, John Oliver's show, called Restaurant Workers of America, a fake worker organization with a fake campaign pack called Save Our Tips that has been going around trying to scare workers into believing that their wages should not go up, that somehow their tips will be impacted, and mask it as coming from other workers when in fact it's coming from an entity that has been created and funded by the Restaurant Association. So next slide. I've just been providing my contact information here as well as that of our National Research Director, who comes to New Jersey frequently, lives very close to New Jersey, comes to New Jersey very frequently, actually was there, I believe, yesterday with everybody at the lobbying day that occurred at the state capitol. Collectively, we are really hoping New Jersey does the right thing here. We're very grateful and thankful to a few key legislators, elected officials in New Jersey, Governor Murphy, who announced the idea of one fair wage in his transition memo in becoming governor, and has announced several times publicly that he supports no carve-outs, a clean 15, full elimination of the sub-minimum wage. We want to thank Representative Shavonda Sumter in the Assembly, who has announced that who has already introduced one fair wage, and in the Senate, Senator Weinberg, who's been talking to us about doing the same. There are some really fabulous elected officials who agree with us and who I think are moving in the right direction. The real question will be, where does 15 end up in New Jersey? Will it create a sub-minimum wage that effectively, with new regulation last week, effectively creates a sub-minimum wage that is the minimum wage, not $15 in New Jersey?
Thank you, Saru. I had a question that did come in. Someone was asking, how do you speak to small business owners in regards to the change in the increase in minimum wage? Many of them feel as though that, as you had noted before, might put them out of business or simply be something that they can't afford. Could you please address that question?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the question. So, as I mentioned, we have an association of 770 restaurant companies that actually agree with us and are very vocally leading this fight, saying we want the minimum wage to go up for tipped and non-tipped workers. And several of the reasons why they support it are, one, first of all, these bills propose phasing in the minimum wage for both tipped and non-tipped workers very slowly and methodically over many years. So the bill that Representative Sumter introduced in New Jersey proposes raising while the overall minimum wage might go up like $1 or a little over $1 an hour from where it is now to $15 over a period of several years. The sub-minimum wage, which is so much lower in New Jersey, $2 an hour at the federal level, would go up to $15 over a much longer time period. In many states, it's between 8 and 10 years. That you're talking about getting these tipped workers who are at a much lower rate to 15. So the first thing to note for small businesses is that we're talking about a very slow and gradual time phase-in of the minimum wage, during which time all restaurants, small and large, are all going to have to go up together. And what the small businesses that are part of our association have noted is, over this slow phase-in period, they see incredible benefits. We have been able to document and quantify the reduction in employee turnover that comes with paying your people more, with having more stable livelihoods for your employees. In fact, we did a study with 1,100 restaurant owners across the country and found that you can cut your employee turnover in half by paying people a livable wage. That's in the industry with the highest rates of turnover of any industry in the US. So you can reduce turnover, you can increase productivity, you can increase profitability. These wages are phased in over a very slow time period. But if even that's not enough to convince a small business owner you're talking to, I would really encourage you to please put them in touch with us, because we would love to put them in touch with a peer, another small restaurant owner that actually agrees, that can talk to them, even perhaps a small business restaurant owner across the border in New York that has already experienced this, already went from $3 to almost $10 an hour. Small business is booming in New York in the restaurant industry. And so we can put, often it's peer-to-peer contact, businesses, letting them hear from another small business that's been through it. We also have training and technical assistance that we offer for free to a small business owner that says, I just can't do it, I can't figure it out. We're happy to both provide a peer who can say how they did it and actually provide free training and technical assistance to help them figure out how to do it.
Wow, thank you for that. That's very helpful for those that want to get more information on that process. Saru, I had one other question that has come in, and would you be able to provide an update on the current status of the New Jersey bill? I believe it's Bill A-15 that addresses the minimum wage.
I wonder if Analilia is now with us from Working Families Party and would like to speak to that. Are you able to open up so the participants can speak?
Yes.
Hi, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. So first, thank you, Saru, for this great presentation, and thanks to the Housing Community Corporation to take interest on the issue. All right, so the current state of 15, in the beginning of the year, we had a commitment from the legislature to move on a $15 minimum wage bill. Many may know that it was voted on and passed as a clean bill. Unfortunately, it didn't include anything for tipped workers. But it was a bill that was moved in, under the Christie administration as late as 2015 and vetoed, obviously, by the governor. Governor Murphy has come in, vetoed by Governor Chris Christie, to be clear. Governor Murphy came in making a commitment to raise the minimum wage, expressing an interest to look at the issue of tipped workers. It makes sense in terms of the work that he did around pay equity, and we have a lot of support on that level. We've also had a lot of support verbally from the legislature. However, up until November, there was no bill that had been introduced around the issue. We convened a table called Raise NJ, and we were able to reach out to a couple legislators who agreed to introduce a bill on a clean 15 for non-tipped eligible workers. That was Assemblywoman Brittany Timberlake, and then a bill to raise the minimum wage, ultimately going to 15 for tipped eligible workers, which was Assemblywoman Shavonda Sumter. Those two bills were introduced sometime in November, and very quickly after, the Assembly Speaker moved to introduce his own bill, which falls short of where we as advocates and fall short of the issues espoused in this presentation. We had the bill falls short in several ways. It has exclusions of multiple categories of workers: farm workers, youth workers, seasonal workers, workers that are employed in 10 or less employees. And then for tipped workers, it only raises the minimum wage to, I think, $5.13. It makes it lowers the tipped eligibility, or sets a tipped credit, better yet, at around $9 and some change. So, where we're at right now is that yesterday we had a lobby day pushing and urging legislators to push against this bill, in particular, this bill language. We know that there's a negotiation going on between the governor, the Senate president, and the Assembly Speaker. They have kept their discussion very close to the vest. So I have no idea. No one seems to know where they're at, but they keep saying to us that they're making progress. So what it signals to us is that we need to make sure that we keep the pressure on the Senate, the Assembly, particularly the members who have expressed interest in fairness and equity, going back to anyone who voted or talked about pay equity or different, justice issues. We're circling back to them to say, this is, if you're concerned about hunger, if you're concerned about pay equity, if you're concerned about social justice, then one of the smartest things that you could do is move a comprehensive $15 minimum wage with no exclusions. And we think that by putting the pressure on members of the caucus and urging them to put pressure on their leadership, that it will move, that negotiation that's going on between the houses and the front office to a better place of where we're at. I think we have to take it out of just 3 people's hands and kind of, put it to a broader group of legislators. And so we're going to start the beginning of the year. We closed out this year. Yesterday was the last voting session. So like I said, we had a big lobby day, and our aim is to start in the beginning of January with a renewed call to action on a comprehensive and inclusive minimum wage bill.
Well, thank you very much, and we're wrapping up in reference to time, and want to thank our listeners as well for joining in, but especially Saru Jayaraman, President of the Restaurant Opportunity Center, and Analilia Mejia, Executive Director of the New Jersey Working Families Organization. On behalf of the network, thank you for providing information on this most timely topic. And again, for our memberships and listeners, you will be able to access this webinar on our website through our training archives. And we want to thank you again for taking time out of your day to listen to this important topic. Thank you very much.